Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to the Planning and Development Management Committee for the 29th of August 2018. Do we have any apologies? No? We're all here? Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest regarding the applications in front of us today? No? Okay, thank you. Deputations. There has been no request for deputations, but we do have with us today a Mr. Richard Focus and a Mr. Ramsey Johnson. They are here regarding the very first application for the erection of 117 houses in Blairgowrie, and they're here on hand to answer any questions that the committee we have. So we can cross that if you have any questions for them. Okay, now the minutes of the previous meeting, do we have any comments? Are we happy to agree those minutes? Agree the minute, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, and that brings us on to the major application for today. This is an erection of 117 dwelling houses, garages and associated works, approval of matters specified in condition 10/01360, land southwest of the entrance of Maple Place in Blairgowrie. And I would like to ask Jamie Scott to speak on the report.
Thank you, Convener. I'll take you through some stills for the site context and go over some parts of the proposal. However, before I do that, I want to give members two updates in respect of late representations that were received and that we're aware of. The first relates to a 500+ signature petition which was submitted out with the statutory periods for representations, and it's not a valid representation. Paragraph 67 of the report you have before you does refer to that. That submission raises concern generally from those petitioners in respect of the scale of development generally in Blairgowrie, and while not mentioned, it isn't specific to the proposal, but just to make you members aware that it is aware of within our considerations. The second letter is from a legal representative of a neighbouring landowner who has previously made representation to the proposal. This was received very recently, and therefore it too is not a valid representation, but I wish to apprise members of what the contents of the letter are, should they not be familiar with it, and should they have any questions in their considerations today. The submission states that road safety matters haven't been addressed in the report. Members will note, however, that the summary of the transport planning consultation response that is contained within paragraph 61, it is concluded, following discussion with other road officers, which includes road safety and maintenance teams, that there are no objections to the proposal, and this would be subject to conditions, and quoting from that paragraph, in respect of pedestrian safety and traffic safety are attached to the permission. So in essence, the conclusion has been reached that road safety has been considered and subject to planning conditions which are detailed within the report before you, that there are no road safety concerns. Road safety matters are also referred to in other parts of the report as relevant. Other matters are raised by this representee in respect of the provision of a link road, including how and when this would be delivered, and ownership and rights over the strip of land that's between the western boundary of the application site we have today and Hazelwood Road, which is controlled by their client. Again, I'll go through the location and any implications of that as part of the stills, and any questions that you have. Planning officers and also our roads colleague, Mr. Dean Salmon, is here to answer any questions. But suffice to say that the concerns raised in the letters are not new matters. Those matters are actually addressed within the roads and access section of the report, which is paragraph 80 onwards. And we're considered that all relevant matters have been considered and identified. But as I said, officers are available to answer questions on these matters should members have any questions. What I'll do now is I'll go through, if it's okay, just some stills on the overview of the proposal that we have before you today. What you see on the screen is an aerial photograph of the site. So the red line site boundary is identified. So you'll see that it is a current greenfield site at the moment. Whilst previously in agricultural use, you see the southern portion beyond the road there, it is in grass. It hasn't actually been actively cultivated in some time. And again, I'll touch on that as we go through later slides. The site is the majority, up to about 80% of the portion of Site H64 as allocated within the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2014. The remaining part of that allocation goes beyond the southern boundary of the site. This is the proposed site layout plan, so you can see how the proposal for the 117 dwellings is to propose to take shape. So essentially what would happen is there'd be a continuation of the existing stopped up road, which is Elm Drive, which you can see is the little nook within the northern boundary of the site, and it's proposed to take a link through the site, and it would stop at the western boundary of the site with Hazelwood Road, and again I'll go into that in further detail later. So that's the primary access to the site. There are secondary roads which would then lead to the other parts of the development. And crucially, there is an improved and adopted road that would be taken onto the recreational area at Piggy Lane, which currently is just an access track. This is the proposed landscape layout plan, which has been revised following feedback from officers and indeed comment from the community. So what you can see here, within the central northern area, you'll see there's a green area. That's actually effectively a small stream and a small culverted area, which would feed the drainage that goes into the Suds Basin. The Suds Basin at the northern part is designed to be a detention basin, and the basin to the south of the site.
Sorry, excuse me. We're having issues with this.
Yeah, I'll turn it off and we'll just have to swap the presentation onto the centre screen there behind you.
Is the committee happy that happens? Okay, that would certainly be beneficial, Mary. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm sorry about that. We're just still having problems with the technology.
Okay, I think we'll need to make sure that we get this sorted out. If it could come up to the central screen, please, that would be beneficial for committee. Thank you.
Before continuing, I'll just wait until it comes on the centre screen so you can see the drawing I'm discussing.
Convener, if I may, just while we're waiting for the magic lantern to get going again.
Certainly.
I don't want to sound any more like a grumpy old git than I usually am, but the technology never failed upstairs in the old steam-driven version that we had. And no offence meant to the staff who are doing their best, but it seems to be an outrage that we can't get this stuff to work. And every time we need it, it seems to fail. We must have kept the receipts. It's not been in here that long, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree with me that it would be better with a flip chart than this stuff that flicks off and on. It doesn't look good from our point of view, from a governance, and certainly the public must wonder why we're all staring about all over the place when it's not working. So I think really we've had enough of this, and it needs to get sorted. It's not your fault either, I might add.
No, and I'm not taking it as such. Councillor Simpson, thank you very much. I actually agree. We had asked if everything was working prior to this, but we seem to be having some technical hitches. But I do take on board what you're saying, and we'll see if we can move this forward. Thank you very much. It is off the far end screen as well now. Is that? It now seems to be up entirely on that one, but not the far end one. I do apologise, but.
It is up on the centre screen now behind you.
Absolutely. Can everybody view? Okay. May I ask if you wouldn't mind coming over? If you could sit at one of the, certainly on the back seats, then that would certainly allow you to view the details coming forward. Okay. Thank you very much for coming over. Right, if I could ask Mr. Scott to continue. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is the landscape plan. So essentially you'll see that the layout plan is overlaid on that, which was the previous slide that we were on, and it shows the landscape proposals. So I was talking about the northern portion within the central area there. There is an existing watercourse stream. It's a very modest watercourse, but essentially in order to provide a degree of biodiversity enhancement and to respect the potential flood risk from that burn, it's proposed to provide a green and a blue corridor which would provide walking routes through the site onto Piggy's Lane. And again, there's a more formal footpath which would come off Elm Drive which would feed into that as well. Thereafter, the suds basin, which is the solid green area, you can see that rectangle area with it almost in the centre of the shot. That's a detention basin which would retain a degree of water, but water flow is controlled through pumping and various mechanisms. There is a further basin to the south of the site. You can see there's a brown hatched area. Essentially, that's a dry basin, so it would only be required in times of exceedance. So for the most part, it would appear to be a landscaped green area, which would provide part of the main framework for the landscape proposals. Throughout the site, the landscaping scheme would propose on the extended elm drive a boulevard effect with a number of mature trees, heavy standard trees are proposed within that locality to give it an immediate framework. And thereafter on the peripheral roads, again, it's complemented by further trees and bushing and planting, which provides a degree of connectivity between the green sites in and around the site. So this is the first photograph that I'm showing you. This is taken from the northern boundary of the site, looking southwards. This is the existing stopped up portion. So the adopted road ends where you can see the road does turn into a track there. This is taken adjacent to the access road to the Blairgowrie Community Campus. And as I said, it leads into the site. So the proposal is extend this road further into the site to provide access. This is taken effectively off the track as it would turn round towards Piggy Lane and continue south. So this is looking northwest over the site, towards the portion of housing proposed in the northwest of the site. Just to the right of shot, you'll see there is some evidence of construction. That's houses being erected at Blackthorn Place. And just beyond the trees are part of the cemetery grounds and also the community campus. This is moving towards the central southern part of the site. So this is the existing access track, which effectively would be replaced by an adopted road. It's looking towards the eastern boundary of the site with Piggy Lane, which is a very well used recreational area. So a number of paths would connect into this area, and this is the point where the two suds basins I was talking about would be to the left and right of shot, respectively. This is a reverse view from almost the same point, looking north back across the site to the existing houses on Maple Place. So you can see there is a modest kind of valley sloping from right down to the left, which would be, there'd be housing in the immediate foreground, but then the green area would also be where the biodiversity enhancements are proposed. This is looking back across the site towards the houses off Hazelwood Road, and also you can see the mature trees in the far ground. That's the boundary to Blairgowrie Cemetery. The suds basing that I was talking about earlier, which would be a dry facility, is to the left of shot. You will see there's an existing property there, that's pre-laid. There are existing flow issues with unresolved drainage issues from the existing field drains, but the proposal for the suds basin would resolve that, and there would be a fail-safe mechanism in terms of putting a bund around pre-laid to stop any exceedance actually affecting that property. So that would be a positive benefit to what an existing situation that's occurring. This is from the southern portion of the site, looking north. So again, as you can see, it's an uncultivated land at the moment. So this would be almost the central area of where the houses are proposed, looking back to the existing settlement built area up at Blairgowrie, Maple Place and Blackthorn Place. This is taken from out with the site, looking towards the western boundary. So in fact, you can see the wall on the left-hand side, which is the boundary wall for the cemetery, and the stopped-up road, which is the adopted portion of Hazelwood Road. You will note, and as the report refers to, that there is a 3.7 metre strip from the adopted portion of the road with the site boundary of this allocation, H64. The proposal here is to provide the road up to the boundary in control of the applicant in accordance with the in-principle permission that they have for this site, but it would leave that 3.7 metre strip unresolved at this point. And this takes you back to the layout plan, which just shows you the general layout and arrangement of the proposal.
Thank you very much. Because we had some additional information that was given to committee there on items that come back in, I was wondering if the committee could actually ask any questions regarding that specifically, if they have any, regarding the petition and regarding the extra information that has come in, and we'll sort of break the questions down. Do you have any questions that you may want from officers regarding these two additions? No? Okay, so we're happy to move on to asking questions. Not only do we have the officers here for that, but equally, as I've already stated, there are representations on hand for any questions that you may have of the applicant and the landowner. So open up to questions. Councillor Coates.
Would it be, could you show, for the sake of clarity, where the proposed link road is going to go into the site?
It may be easier to go back to the landscaping plan because it's not quite coming through in detail there. Would it be possible to go to the landscape plan, please? Okay, so this is the landscape proposal. You can see there's a road which I was talking about that flows through the site and it comes out at the western boundary. So that white area effectively, which is buffered by the green, that is the proposed extension of Elm Drive, and it stops at the western boundary of the site. The last photograph still that I showed was the reverse view of that. So it is currently stopped up at Hazelwood Road, and it would be stopped on the western boundary. So that's the 3.7 metre strip, which is on the western boundary, just beyond the application site. You can see there. Yeah, exactly. Does that clarify?
Would it make more sense to construct the proposed link road before the start of the development, so that it's taking, you know, potentially a lot of heavy goods traffic and everything else off the scene, basically, and straight into the site?
Condition 2 within the recommendation before you is for the link road to be provided as early as possible, no later than 3 years, which would follow the anticipated build programme of the applicant. So the link road would only be built up to the boundary. We can't oblige the developer to build it beyond the boundary, so it wouldn't be a physical road connection at that point to Hazelwood Road, but it certainly would be built as quick as reasonably possible as part of this proposal. And as the report does explain, it does leave a 3.7 metre strip effectively between the two roads that would not be through connected. Traffic therefore would come through from Elm Drive up through Berrydale Road. There is also a condition for construction traffic management plans to make sure that the flow of traffic is appropriate and it doesn't conflict with neighbouring land uses, such as the operations of the school, drop-off, pick-off, etc. And that was an approach taken for the adjacent site at Blackthorn Place as well. So we are satisfied through those conditions that we have control about the delivery and the management of construction traffic for the development.
Certainly, Councillor Coates.
Just to clarify even more in my head, we're going to have heavy goods traffic travelling through residential areas potentially during the construction of this site, when it needn't be, if the link road is constructed fully prior to the beginning of the site.
Yeah, appreciate that would be the case, but the link road in this context wouldn't be a link to an existing road, so it would be a no-through road during the entirety of this development, up to the western boundary only of the application site. There is no other avenue to get into the development site, so yes, it would use existing roads that go through a residential area, and we do recognise there's a degree of impact in terms of traffic movements. I can pass to my colleague Dean Salmon to talk about the construction effects, because the transport assessment and the addendum that we've got does consider movements of traffic, and he'll be able to speak more to that in detail.
Good morning, councillors. In regards to the construction traffic, as my colleague had mentioned there is a condition for construction traffic management. This will dictate the movements, routes that are taken by such traffic and the times at which they can take them. And we deem that a suitable condition to control those movements and any safety impact that may be associated with them.
Okay. Any further questions? Can I just state that I'm assuming, since we're actually asking questions of officers, that we're not asking questions of the agent and the landowner? No. Okay. That's fine. Continue. Okay. Okay. There's quite a few actually, but okay. There's quite a few. It's all right. We'll start with Councillor Waters and I'll work my way through. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Just some questions on the drainage, and just looking for some clarification on a couple of points. Now, we've already in the presentation been told about the historical issues with the field drainage system. Initially, we had in the report we're saying that SEPA had some initial concerns, and our own flooding team had some issues and looked for clarification. After that, we seem to have got a drawing put in with from the applicants on a drainage layout flood route. So, which looks like if the drainage system wasn't coping, what would happen to the water as it flowed across the site? And it just raises a little bit of concern with me. Is the drainage system actually adequate, or is there an expectancy that there may be potentially backlogs which may cause the drainage to flood out, hence the need to provide a separate drawing that showed these overland flood routes to where the drainage would go? Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is the overland flood routes are part and parcel of any scheme. So they've got to design the drainage to the 200-year plus climate change, but they've also to show if that event was exceeded, where would the water go? So that's just to make sure it doesn't go towards houses, that it goes towards an area that is has the least impact. So that's basically a standard thing for all applications that we would do, something like that if it was required.
This is the first time I'm a newish councillor, so I haven't seen a lot, but it's the first one I've come across where I've actually seen them, and it came in retrospectively. It didn't come in with the initial application. Did you raise concerns, or is this, are you looking for a new policy or some way to make sure that with every application we should see drawings come in showing that?
It's within our developer's guidance note that above the design standard that they show also an exceedance event and what would happen. So it's the same with a flood scheme being built that can only cope with a 200-year event. We also show what happens when that event gets exceeded, because obviously there can be a rainfall event higher than what you design things for. So yeah, that should be in all applications. Sometimes it's maybe at the back of a flood risk assessment, it's maybe not as prominent, because in this case we would like to see it because there's been historical issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Sorry, could I just clarify, Mr. Scott, first of all, if I may, going back to this link road that we have here, this has been a desire for many local residents for some years, I believe, long before my time. Are we able to condition in any way, I'm not sure if we can, that this link road is completed, perhaps along the lines, perhaps before the first house is sold, or are we allowed to put any sort of condition in to do that?
You are correct. It is a long-held desire of local development plan policy, and that's talked about in section 80. So taking the road up the boundary, the condition we are recommending would be for the provision of the road within a 3-year period. That would correlate with the built plan for the developer. If members considered for reasons that ought to be brought forward, certainly a timescale can be set within the condition, but we're satisfied as officers that within a 3-year period, to facilitate the gradual development of the site from a north to south, that's appropriate. So we would recommend that condition 2 is still appropriate.
Thank you. Just follow on from that. So in theory, we could actually insist it's completed, the link road joins up completely with Hazelwood Road prior to the first house being sold?
Yeah, that's a separate matter. Essentially, we have to have reference back to what the in-principle conditions require. So condition 6 of that permission sets what is required here in terms of that link road. And in essence, it doesn't place a positive burden on the applicant to physically provide the link to Hazelwood Road. It only requires the link to be brought up to the western boundary. That's our settled view in terms of planning and our legal officers. So no, it would not be appropriate. They're not obliged to do it here. And within an approval of matters specified in conditions application, it isn't appropriate to introduce any further burdens, such as something out with the site, like the provision of that link road. And indeed, other matters that are talked about in the report in terms of community green space may have had aspirations for further enhancements to Piggy Lane and also within the recreational areas for synthetic pitches, etc. But again, for the same reasons, because they're not captured within the original consideration for the in-principle permission, they are out with our scope for consideration here today.
Okay, could I just have one more?
Certainly, Councillor.
And then I'll finish for a moment, and after that. Section 127 of the report mentions this potential lay-by going in on Elm Drive, which obviously will alleviate some of the problems with parking. Could we do that on a Section 75 to force that to be done?
Section 127, yep, yeah. It does identify that essentially that's been offered up unilaterally by the developer, who happens to be the same applicant for the Blackthorn Place development to the northeast of this site. So they're effectively doing that as a goodwill gesture planning gain. We don't consider it's required for planning purposes for that development or indeed for this development. Because it falls out with the application site here, yes, it theoretically could be controlled, but it isn't something that is required as part of this development. And because it's not in their control, the traffic levels and impacts that we've assessed in terms of movements and road safety, it isn't something that's required as part of this proposal. But I do understand the applicant is pursuing that with our road safety colleagues, amongst other potential solutions to address an existing situation with traffic management to do with the school, houses, etc. But it wouldn't be appropriate in our view to attach that, and it's not technically possible to attach it as part of this proposal.
Thank you. Come back in a minute.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. One or two issues. My first question is directed to yourself and the Vice Convener, and it reflects, I think, the discussion we've had about roads and the link road. I wonder in future whether a kind of complicated situation about roads and link roads, if we could have within the papers a simple outline plan with the roads marked on them so that would aid our understanding. Mr Scott's description was fine, but I think that would be helpful in future. It's not always necessary to have that, but it's certainly something. And I know we can dig through all the application online plans, but sometimes for us, if you're reading at 9 o'clock at night, that isn't always convenient. So I'll leave that with you as a point. But Mrs. Concliffe's going to say something, I think.
We have a few nodding heads, but Mrs. Concliffe.
Yes, it is something that we could add. We could do an annotated site plan. The difficulty we've had in the past of putting it in the papers is you've obviously got kind of A4 size, and we would normally try and show it on the screen on the day. But if it is something like that, then we could look to try and add that as part of the report that goes out to members.
Thank you. I regularly use my magnifying glass for council reports, Convener. I'm on page 15.
Sorry, Convener, can I, on the same vein there, could I ask if it's at all
Yeah, we can, again, we can put hyperlinks. We would refer to another permission. In principle, we can put that as a hyperlink to that report or any other sites that we refer to. We can do that.
Councillor Wilson, thank you for that.
Grateful to Councillor Ban's helpful suggestion. I'm on page 15, para 59. At the top of the page it says a mini glass recycling point. Is this just to be for glass, or would it be for recycling other materials as well?
I believe it would be for glass. There's actually an existing mini glass recycling facility on Elm Drive opposite Blackthorn Place. So the informative that we're suggesting as part of this report that feeds on from our waste service colleagues, there may be a need for a further one within this application site or to supplement the existing provision that's off-site.
Okay. £10 for the charity fund, Convener. On page 18, para 75, I'm curious to know that the layout seeks to avoid cul-de-sac style development, and I thought we were in favour of cul-de-sac style development. It looks as if there are some almost cul-de-sacs in there. I'm unaware that we were anti-cul-de-sac design. Could you make a comment on that?
Yeah, in terms of placemaking and connectivity, clearly a cul-de-sac would lead to nowhere. So the layout that you have here, it tries to allow a circulatory route within the sites. You've got the main road, which would ultimately be a link road, and to the south and western parts of the site. Again, they loop around back to that road in the secondary road. So on the southern boundary, there is a stopped up road you can see there, and it looks as though it might be a cul-de-sac, but that actually would the conditions of condition 2 that we're recommending today would actually require an access to be made available to access the southern part of H64. So in time, that will not be a cul-de-sac. And the other areas, because there is a through route to get out and it wouldn't be going in and back on the same road, cul-de-sacs are avoided. It provides an enhancement of place in terms of having more houses facing onto the street and onto the open space areas, etc., complementing the footpaths going through the site. So in placemaking terms, we wouldn't say we were against cul-de-sacs as such, but they don't necessarily provide the through linkages that we'd be seeking as part of a proposal.
Thank you. I'm on the same page, Convener, para 76, and this is about density. And halfway through that paragraph, represents a development density of approximately 21 dwellings per hectare, is it? Hectare? Yeah. How does that compare with the densities of housing round about?
Yep, so 21 dwellings per hectare is a medium scale density. In terms of comparisons, the report doesn't explicitly mention other areas, but I have done a bit of background work, so I can clarify that there are a variety of densities within the area. So immediately to the north of the application site, which is Maple Place, and as that continues to the north and east, that's a lower scale development of around about 14.9, let's say 15 dwellings per hectare. Moyness Park, which is to the northwest of the site, beyond the community campus and Blackthorn Place, is a development density of around about 25 dwellings per hectare, so it's a little bit more dense than this one. In a wider context, the proposal at Glenalmond Road, which you actually have later today for adding of sunrooms to that development, that's again around about the 1920 mark, so fairly similar to this development. So in Blairgowrie and Rattray in general, there is a wide variety in scales of development. This one sits comfortably within those. Density isn't a determining factor in itself, as we've alluded to in the report. We do look at the layout and design. And the number of house types, I think it's 14 different house types, scaling from 2 to 5 bed. It will nudge the density up slightly, but of course it gives you a wider variety of houses, whereas the McLaren Park, that's 25, they're all but 3 or 4 detached 3-4 bed homes. So the density does compare quite well to those.
Thank you. I'm over on the page, Convener, para 78. Material finishes. Grey windows and doors, typical of the area. I don't see a lot of grey windows and doors when I go to Blairgowrie, but I'm maybe not there often enough. Is that really typical of the area?
Again, what I can clarify, the existing norm and typology, I suppose, for all the modding housing to the north predominantly is for a white UPVC. The Blackthorn Place development, which was brought forward and is now being constructed, the house types are actually very, very similar here in terms of the material finishes and palettes that are proposed. They were approved with grey windows, doors, grey slate. You've got a concrete kind of block use and also the render. So the typology is very similar and almost identical to that was approved at the Blackthorn Place development. So reference in the report saying that that's happens elsewhere, that's what it means. It's not saying all of Blairgowrie, and perhaps it could be further clarified that it was actually in reference to the Blackthorn Place.
The immediate vicinity or immediate surrounding area. I'm on page 26. Convener, nearly finished, by the way. The affordable housing requirement, there's a kind of complicated formula there. I just want to make sure we're getting our due balance or amount one way or another from the developer, are we? They're not shortcutting us.
No, we're most certainly getting our due. This development itself triggers a certain contribution, so it's 25%, which equates to the 27 units. In effect, what's happening, again referring back to the Blackthorn Place development, that being taken forward, the land was owned by the same applicant here, and the council are taking that proposal forward. So in effect, they have banked what we call credits for the 25 and a bit houses on that site. And so because of that, they can offset those credits against this development. So that development is actually fulfilling their obligations here for the affordable housing, all but 2.25, I think, units that are remaining. And those remaining units were seeking a commuted sum contribution at approximately £27,000 it would equate to. So that would round off the full 100% requirement for their affordable housing obligations.
Kind of final, second last one, Convener, the Link Road. Is there a ransom strip involved in this process? And have we got a plan for that?
In terms of, so as I've confirmed, the applicant here is only obliged to provide the link, so the extension of Elm Drive up to the western boundary. It can't physically connect to Hazelwood Road, which is on the other side. There is a 3.7 metre strip, which essentially has been stopped short of the application site boundary. That situation arose, that development was completed in the 90s and 2000s by the housing developer on the other side. We did at that time require that Hazelwood Road to go up to the boundary, the long-term plan being that the through road Elm Drive would be provided. Through an application, they appealed non-determination of an application to remove that planning condition, which a reporter agreed with. So effectively, they were allowed to stop short of the boundary by 3.7 metres. That said, there is an obligation for that landowner, so there's a legal agreement in place that that land, the 3.7 metre strip, can only be used, it's safeguarded for use for the provision of a distributor road to provide that final link. We can't compel any completion of that road through this application directly, and the report does refer to in the roads and access section that the council may have recourse to other means, whether that would be a compulsory purchase in the community interest. We would give consideration to that, but that's kind of an aside to what we're dealing with and what we can oblige through the developer here, but that is an option available.
We've got to deal with this application. Okay. Page 27, finally, convener, general practitioner capacity. I was kind of disappointed we didn't get a response from NHS on this one. But I think that's becoming a more and more valid issue as the population gets more elderly and we build more houses and there's more children as well around. Have we got some links with the health board? It'll be through community planning, obviously, in a general sense, but just to maybe address this issue about GP capacity, because I think it's a real one. It's not just the GPs, it's the nurses and the other staff that work from health centres and medical centres. So I'm maybe seeking some assurance, not necessarily now, but something that maybe could be looked at.
It is something that I think is very important in getting the health service to actually comment would be a massive step forward. It has an ongoing effect on the communities. It is important that the communities are aware that the health service realise and understand what the developments are going to do and what pressures that might actually put on them. Is something that I think we should be trying to work on and I have raised. So I will bring it back whenever I get an answer as to how we can make this work. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor James and then Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, Convener. Following on quite nicely from that, my concern is with the GP capacity. I'm actually a patient in an adjacent surgery or the closest surgery to this particular area, and there's currently a 2-week wait for a routine appointment, and this is only going to get worse. I also have concerns that I know we're not allowed to take it into consideration, but the cumulative effect, you know, we're on the eastern side of the cemetery. We've only recently given permission for another large build on the western side of the cemetery. So I don't know if when you consider these, you take the two separately. You know, you're looking at this as one topic rather than looking at what was recently passed. With that in mind, my question, which I got to eventually, again, another one of my pet hates. We've now got a plan before us for 119 houses. God knows where these people are going to come from. Why has it gone from our figure, and I know you're going to say it's an indicative number, but like everybody else, I think it's an upper number. It's gone from 85, another 34 houses to 119. Why have we gone for that figure rather than stick to what we had?
At risk of saying what you didn't, it is a design-led process and the numbers are indicative. So the consideration of the design, layout and scale, that is the position we're in at the moment. We are not bound by those numbers in terms of a minimum and a maximum, and it's a design-led process to understand what capacity the site can hold. But it's not, capacity isn't the be-all end-all or density. It's about what kind of place that would provide, what kind of amenity it would give to the residents. The proposal for the 117 that's been presented today, we've considered against our placemaking standards, the amenity standards, whilst ensuring that all technical matters like roads, drainage, open space and all other provisions can be adequately accommodated on site. And we're comfortable, and more than comfortable, that this proposal does actually meet all of those policy requirements, which is why we've got the recommendation before us today for approval subject to conditions. In terms of being that design-led process, if there were concerns, indeed there have been refinements to the proposals, they haven't happened to require a reduction in numbers. We would only seek to remove dwellings if it was causing an issue in terms of compliance with policy, but there are none present here, and that's why we've ended up with the number of 117.
Councillor Barnacle.
Yeah, thanks, convener. One point is a suggestion. We saw the site layout there, which was very helpful. Is it not possible to attach something like that to the actual report alongside the...
I think on the back of Councillor Wilson's comment about annotating a site plan, which Mrs Condliff alluded to, we can do that if that would felt to be beneficial, and certainly we'll look at that for sites that are on a wider scale.
With large sites. Yeah. Of just 2 points, really picking up on the earlier comment from Councillor Coates. The capacity issue, I mean, we've talked here about indicative numbers, and we will be discussing that this afternoon when we look at LDP2 and capacity ranges. I notice that in this particular case, if we take these 117 houses plus the 31 you suggest in paragraph 76, that takes us up to the maximum 148 of the capacity range of LDP2, providing we can ensure that 31 is not breached when that comes to the fore. But given the nature of the petition and people's concept that there's a lot of housing going on, I appreciate the site is within the plan and therefore housing principle is established. Should we not be thinking about density more constructively, particularly when there's issues around infrastructure and not necessarily always going to the maximum the site can maintain? I'm just suggesting that is something we should take account of, and that's that point. And the other point, because obviously the Community Council and the community generally are really concerned about that level of development, but the other one was the issue on the site layout, the lack of a landscape buffer between existing and proposed properties. Paragraph 96 refers to 9 metres. I mean, when we talk, is that purely the gap between the proposed houses and the existing houses? Is there any sort of landscaping proposals between the existing and proposed housing that are being considered, or have I missed that?
No, correct. So on the northern boundary of this site, you'll see there's a row of dwellings proposed. Those back onto, in effect, the common boundary for around about 40–50% of the site boundary would back onto the rear garden areas of houses along Maple Place. So those concerns relate to potential impacts on amenity and overlooking, etc., from the new properties against the existing. We've considered that in terms of the layout and design, and as you've alluded to, there's at least a minimum of 9 metres which would comply with our guidelines and in terms of placemaking. So because it does meet the adequate standard, given the depth of those gardens to the north and how far they are set back, there isn't going to be any adverse impact in terms of overlooking. And things like daylight, sunlight, because there is such a great separation distance and they're not particularly large-scale dwellings, there's not going to be a significant impact that we would consider to be unacceptable. And in terms of your other question, in terms of density, you have articulated that the percentage of the site that left would allow up to 31 dwellings, and that would be the maximum indicated in the LDP2. Only to comment further than that, the flip side would be if we assess a layout that's appropriate, whilst the density at 21 or up to 25, as it would be for the southern portion of 864, we don't consider density to be an indication in itself, but by developing that scale, if you do meet all the technical requirements of the amenity, etc., you're maximising the potential of the development of that site, rather than under building perhaps, which would require in the longer term further allocation of sites to actually address the identified housing land need. So it's a more efficient use of land resource in that regard. So we don't get centred on the density. We do consider what would be reasonable, and that's why we've reached the conclusions that we have on that site.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, convener. I'm going back to page 26, 123, the 27 affordable housing credits. Now, what is the rationale for having neighbouring sites and condensing all the social housing into one area. I understood that it was far beneficial to have social housing spread throughout these sites. And though I can understand using the credits for perhaps another site that wouldn't be ideal for social housing, I find it hard, but maybe you can explain why it was decided for this site.
So for this application, we calculate the requirement for the 29.25 units. That is what they have to provide. Clearly, through the approval of the plan permission referred to in paragraph 123, that is an entirely unaffordable housing development. That's a settled matter in terms of the decision has been made, and indeed the houses are being built. The only decision, therefore, within this application is to decide whether we can allow the credits to be offset against this proposal. And clearly, because they serve within the same housing market area, school catchment area, etc., there is no reason for us not to accept those. So the two developments are separate in terms of the planning consenting process, but linked because the credits are being offset here. And as I said earlier, the remaining units are being used for commuted sums, which would go towards development elsewhere within the catchment area.
Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Convener. This is really for Mr. Salmon, if I may, and goes back to road safety. Obviously, as we've discussed, there's a school nearby. There is an increase in traffic coming in to Elm Drive, the road leading up to the school. There are no crossing facilities there. Buses are coming in. We have children going to school, and we're encouraging children to go to school by bicycle now. And obviously pedestrians, mothers with children in prams crossing the road. I just want to say, are we sure that, of our position on this? That it's safe?
Yes, road safety have been consulted at some length regarding the site, and there are a number of existing issues in regards to the school, all of which are related to driver behaviour rather than the amount of traffic that is on the route. And they are currently investigating a number of solutions to alleviate this behaviour. But they have made it quite clear that they are satisfied with the conclusion of this report, and they have no objection to it.
Supplementary, I may. Thanks, Mr. Salmon. The problems around the school, as I understand it, again, this predates my time, have been for many years now. And I don't think we've ever, according to one of my co-ward councillors, we've never yet seemed to be able to solve the problem. Given that circumstance, and surely there is an argument that the traffic coming out of this site would exacerbate the problems around that area. Is that something we've considered?
Yes, again, this is something that has been consulted with road safety, and again, it is driver related rather than traffic flow. So, to give you an example, and you're probably well aware, such driver behaviour is inconsiderate parking, carrying out of unsuitable manoeuvres, for instance, turning within the junction, that is it with the school. And there are a number of solutions they are looking at, creating a park and stride. There is obviously the car drop-off that has been mentioned that the developer has offered to fund. Also looking at potentially for car exclusion zone, which would allow for access only. So again, there are no concerns from road safety that the additional traffic will further deteriorate the existing situation.
Okay, it's my understanding that equally as increased traffic, you also end up with a traffic calming situation. But anyway, your follow-on question.
Just one follow-up question for what you were saying, and I've heard about the idea of an exclusion zone around the school, which I presume would run, I don't know the confirmed times, I think 8:30 to 9:30 was possibly discussed. Would that now, assuming we can't get the link road up with Hazelwood Road, would that then present a problem for people trying to get to work from this site?
No, there are various ways that you can implement such an exclusion zone to allow access for residents and exclude all other vehicles. And there are various ways to enforce this, one being the use of automatic number plate recognition, for instance, but it would require further investigation from road safety as in regards to what would be the most appropriate way to enforce such a zone.
Thank you very much.
Councillor James.
Sorry, I suppose this one's really directed at last, convener, to the developers.
We have actually moved past that, but
Okay,
if you are
doesn't matter.
happy to answer a question.
It was only, I mean, the massive concern, but I think by a lot of people, you know, the residents least, is the link road. And it's at the 3.75 metre no man's land, if you like. Had the developer considered that as it's conditioned, the road safety management plan is conditioned to, you know, for timing and everything else, the financial implication of alleviating that time restriction, which would be placed, I would assume, with school starting and finishing times. If that road, that 3.7 metre length was used and started at the beginning of the project, that would alleviate their time and therefore save them money anyway, which would fund that 3.75 metre. Has that been discussed with the developer?
Mr. Scott.
Just for clarification, there is a strip that there is no obligation to secure through this application, so that will obviously be stopped up within that 3-year period, go up right up to the boundary. The construction management would therefore be on the adopted road network, and it wouldn't allow through connection to Hazelwood Road, but there would be site compounds and construction areas would allow the vehicles to come in and then go back out in a safe manner, no reversing, etc. But for the avoidance of doubt, it wouldn't be through connection at this point. That would require something else to happen, such as the council or that landowner coming forward with the proposal for the link road. By I mean the landowner, I mean on the other side of this application site, not the one we have for this application.
Councillor Band.
Thank you, Convener. It's going back to Councillor Anderson's point about social housing. It was about when developer contributions first came in to provide social housing. It was in part of principle that these developments would take place scattered throughout the development rather than in a single enclave. Now, I know that 10 years ago in 2008, there was a dispensation allowed for that to allow developers to continue with their staff rather than lay them off. Have we abandoned this principle altogether now in the last 10 years, that social housing should not be collected altogether, but should be dispersed rather throughout the development?
We do consider each proposal on their merits. What we have here is there are no proposals for affordable housing directly being applied here. That decision, in effect, the only decision is whether we attribute the credits that they have available within this catchment to offset against this proposal. So we can't reconsider the Blackthorn Place application. It was taken at that time that that was an entire affordable housing development. There is no policy position that would allow us to decline to accept those credits to be applicable to this site. So it isn't a consideration that we have for this site, but in any other site we do consider whether the layout and design of affordable housing is appropriate. And indeed the Glenalmond Road one at Rattray, which we've previously approved and is on the agenda today for change of house types, there was a solution there in terms of affordable housing coming forward in a concerted area, but that's actually the first phase of that development coming forward, so that actually allows the affordable housing to come on stream quicker. So there are various arguments. The Blackthorn Place development allows that to come forward as one project as a first phase effectively of this growth area, and indeed at Glenalmond Road that happens as well. So we do have to balance the benefits of whether that's an appropriate use of the land, but also the delivery to address an immediate shortfall and a fairly critical one within Blairgowrie. There is a public benefit in terms of bringing them forward within that one area.
Yeah, I do appreciate, Convener, that there is a benefit to having the social housing collected together, because the development can proceed and be completed there, whereas in non-social housing situations it takes time to sell each unit as you go along, and I do appreciate that, but it was definitely a point of principle that social housing would be scattered throughout a major development like this rather than all held together.
Yeah, I mean, we have alluded in previous reports that the advice from government that they're kind of peppercorn throughout the site isn't always appropriate to have them as a one block, or actually, probably more importantly, not immediately isolated from the open market housing. So if they're integrated within the site, if you have a large cohesive site for hundreds or thousands of houses, you'd have several different areas of 30 or 40 houses, perhaps of affordable together, but they would be within a larger site. Where you get to appreciate 117 isn't a small site, but if we'd had an affordable housing proposal here, it may have been across a couple of pockets and it might have not been appropriate to put them all in one location. That is considered on a case-by-case basis for taking that policy position of the government into account, and we would, for social keys and integration, do seek to try and place them throughout the site. But for this proposal that we have, it isn't a consideration because there are no affordable housing units being delivered directly on the ground here. The remaining allowance is being paid through a contribution for the 2.25 units. But for future consideration, we can highlight within committee reports why we've reached that conclusion, and where it is appropriate, seek for them to be dispersed through the site for that reason.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Can we move the report? Well, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Do we have a seconder? I will. Councillor Band, thank you. Okay, and do we have an amendment?
May I say something, Convener?
Yes, certainly, Councillor.
Members, we obviously know there's a high demand for housing, and we need to provide that housing, and particularly in Blairgowrie. But I'm concerned about the consequence of housing, and I've made the point this morning of my concerns regarding road safety around the school. There's also a concern of local people that it would be desirable to have the link road open, and I'm sure if that was opened up, it would make it a safer place to be. As I said, we have children going to school and obviously going home at night on bicycles. There's no crossing, no pedestrians, parked cars. There are all problems in the area. We cannot predict what's going to happen with future developments with ideas for changing these problems. And I feel that the development itself will exacerbate the problems that already exist. And obviously opening a link road would help. And my personal preference would have been if we could have put a condition into the proposal for that to be done prior to any construction, but that we can't do. However, my objections, if you want to put it that way, are based on anecdotal evidence. I don't have any technical or analytical data to support this. It's merely on people's views, local people, and what I've seen myself. So I would have to be honest and say that I probably don't have a competent policy reason to reject it. I'm not sure if I could ask Mr. Elliott if that is the case, if I offered a couple of examples, whether he might comment, but I'm happy to do that just for the sake of it. But the thoughts I had was possibly PM1A, the second paragraph, the first sentence of that, and also TA1B brackets A, but as I say, my evidence is analytical, not as anecdotal.
Can I have confirmation, please, Vice Convener? Are you putting forward an amendment based on these two?
Amendment, if Mr. Elliott feels they're competent. If not, then I will withdraw them.
Okay. Mr. Elliott.
I think members, Councillor Braun, the issue here is not so much are there policy grounds, it's the why and what evidence you have to back up. And you've indicated that you have anecdotal evidence, but you don't have technical evidence. So on that, and we have transport planning indicating it's been assessed, and officers who assess on the technical basis, of course, have indicated they have no objection, subject to conditions going in. So on that basis, as I understand it at the moment, you wouldn't have a competent motion to refuse on road safety grounds.
Okay. Then I'll have to withdraw that convener. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Elliott.
Okay, I open up. Is there any other amendment to the motion? No, in that case, the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Right, we move on to the next item of business, which is a, in my notes, here we go, again, in Rattray, erection of 100... Oh, sorry, apologies. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Certainly. Okay. Right, thank you, committee. Erection of 138 dwelling houses and associated works. This is actually a change to house type to include some sun rooms on various plots. I'm not going to read out the numbers of land northeast Lindale, Glenalmond Road in Rattray. And I would like introduce Anne, Mrs. Conliffe, please introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. As the convener has just said, the proposal here is effectively for a change of house type, but it's actually just for the introduction, the potential introduction of sunrooms on the rear of 127 of the original 217 units. Now, when the application came in to us from the developer, there was an indicative line shown on some of the plans, but we took the view that it wasn't part of the full development that we then granted planning consent for. So when they came back looking to have those sunrooms, we had said it has to be a fresh application, which is what we're looking at today. So effectively, it's a bit difficult to see on the screen, but basically every time you see a little green dot there, that is the plots that is proposed to have the potential to offer to new buyers a sunroom if they wished. So if this was approved today, there would be two options available on the plot. So the house remains exactly the same, but it would be a small sunroom onto the rear elevation. And it's proposed over about 6 or 7 different house types within the development. Now, we've had a look at them and are looked at it in terms of the design, in terms of the density that it then creates, the overlooking and potentially of the garden ground, and we're satisfied that it is acceptable. The one other thing I would say just before I conclude is that had the houses all been built, then the size of sunroom that is proposed in the location that they're proposed, it would be permitted development.
Thank you very much. And I open up to committee to ask any questions. Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, convener. It's not just pertaining to this particular application, but I seem to recall that we had one fairly recently for Bellway in Glasgow Road,
yes,
Perth, of a similar nature. Is there any way we can encourage the development and house building industry to think a wee bit farther ahead? And I don't know how they do that in their planning process, because this just involves a lot of extra work, extra reports, and it's a wee bit of trying to deal with the problem as it comes along. I've not a problem with that, but just wonder if we could ask the development industry to think a wee bit smarter and avoid having to go around these circles, if that's the case.
I'm sure the delightful weather at the beginning of the summer might have put a few ideas in people's heads, but thank you very much.
I think, yeah, well, I'm not going with the weather forecast, but maybe Mrs. Conklin wants to make a comment on that.
Yes, it was the same developer at Bertha Park that we had an application relatively recently that was at committee. I think the difficulty is that the developer is looking to try and give more options to the potential purchaser. If what they could have done was put in an application showing the sunrooms as part of the development, but we would have been interested to know if the sunroom wasn't going, what the finish was going to be. They gave us half the information, but not the full information that would have been required. But I'm sure they will take this on board, having had the Bertha Park application and then this application, that they would look to that in the future.
Apologise, it was Bertha Park.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Yes, Ms Gunliff said that it would be small sunrooms. What will happen if someone wants a sunroom but wants a much larger one than is allowed for in these plans?
Then they would have to come back with a fresh application for that.
For the individual sites?
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for officers? No. Okay. Do we? Can we move the paper? Councillor Wilson. I will happily move the paper. Thank you very much. Do we have any amendments? No, the paper carries. Thank you. Okay, that brings us on to the next one. Glasses back on. Okay, again, this is a modification. This is to condition 2, acoustic installation of windows on the erection of 164 dwelling houses and associated works, matters specified by various conditions, to land west of Cherrybank Gardens in Perth. And Mrs. Conliffe, if you could introduce the report.
In some ways, this is similar to the previous application, is that members have already dealt with the main application for the housing on this site. This is the Belway Home site up off the Glasgow Road, and construction has been completed on a number of the properties, and there's working on it at the moment. Now, there was a condition that was approved by members with regard to the noise for the prospective occupiers of the dwelling houses as a result of the proximity to the M90 that you see to the south of the site there. Now, what happened was we received a complaint from one of the occupiers in one of the units, and they were complaining over the noise that they had within the rooms. So we then had a look at it and in discussion with our environmental health colleagues and went back to the developer to ensure that they were complying with the condition of the planning consent that had been granted. And it turned out that the vents, the trickle vents that had been put in the windows weren't sufficient to allow the compliance with the condition. So in other words, on certain rooms of the houses, it was too loud. It was above the level that was required as part of the condition. Our enforcement team served a breach of condition notice on the developers, and hence we're in the position we are today. What they have done is they have then gone for a further noise impact assessment, which has been looked at by our colleagues in environmental health. And what has transpired is that the ground floor of almost all of the properties is fine because of the acoustic fence and the level that it's at, but it is the upper floor windows of the elevations that face on to, so in other words, the southern elevation, that there is a difficulty with. So the proposal is on all of those windows to put in a higher standard of acoustic trickle vent. So on the plan at the moment, you see the green line. That shows the elevation of properties that would require the new trickle vent. So the proposal then is for that number of units, 164 houses was the original, and they would be put in there. You'll see in the report the condition, we've amended the condition to ensure that if, should anybody say we don't want the new vent put in, that they are actually handed the new vent, so this new trickle vent, so that it is there in the property for future purchasers. So it's quite a simple thing with regard to the proposal, but it is a way of overcoming what they currently have as a breach of condition in terms of what was previously approved by members.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. Just a general question on the way we would normally deal with enforcement. Would we rely on public complaining, or do we have any time that enforcement officer might just go and check in general? Because we often impose conditions. I think it would be helpful for members if we knew that these conditions were being policed with a small p. It could be that people had come from Edinburgh or Glasgow, where it's even noisier than it is up beside that road, and didn't actually notice their house was noisy. I don't think we can rely on people always complaining. I think we might be reassured if we knew that when there's a condition of this type, that some check was made prior to the public complaining. Although it is a good news story, it's being fixed, but I think we'd like that reassurance, I think.
We do have a enforcement monitoring officer who tries his best to monitor as many conditions as possible, but you'll appreciate, the number of conditions and the number of applications that we have, but there are certain ones that we would target to monitor initially. Something like this, we would be reliant on complaints, because we wouldn't be going around knocking on doors and saying we want to come in and take noise readings if we hadn't had any reason to suggest that there was an issue. But when we did receive, we have actually only received, I believe, the one complaint, but we have taken action on that and got the information. But as I say, we do have a monitoring officer and we do try to monitor as many as possible.
Councillor James?
Yeah, thanks, convener. Mine's pretty much a general question as well. This application, is it come to us as a request from the developer, or is it something we've said to the developer, you need to do this? I'm just very conscious, you know, you buy a house next to an airport and complain about airport noise. You know, you buy a house next to a motorway. Are we, you know, using a sledgehammer to crack a nut?
The application is here because the applicant is currently in a breach of condition notice, because we put a condition on about the level of noise. So we're not saying it's going to be totally silent, but what we did say when we granted the consent was that there's a certain level that should be allowed within the rooms of the property. And with the vents that they had put in, standard vents, that wasn't meeting that condition. So if your example of next to an airport, there will be, if it was a new house getting built, there would be conditions, and they may have triple glazing, various other things, and it would only be if they're in breach of that.
Do we have any further questions? No? Can we move the paper? Oh, sorry, Councillor Waters, I beg your pardon. We do have another question.
Thank you, convener. Just one. You said that the complaint was from a specific room. Was it a bedroom that the complaint was made from? The person who put the complaint in.
The original complaint just referred to the noise in their property, having moved into the property. They were concerned, but as I say, we then were looking for the examples of which rooms breached the condition, because our aim was to ensure that the condition was being fully complied with, and that was a requirement from our colleagues in environmental health. So the ones which are proposed for the new vents, they are, I think, in the most part, almost all bedrooms on the upper floor.
And just a subsequent question in relation to the other rooms in the house, because I think in the initial papers that came forward, all the rooms were to hit the same specification for trickle vents and double glazed window. But for the other rooms in the house, do they meet the conditions that were initially set out? And it's the only ones that are getting replaced are the ones that are not meeting. We're not reducing. What I'm concerned about is we're not reducing the standard for the downstairs rooms. They do. We are sure that they do meet the conditions specified within the initial conditions.
Yeah, you're completely correct, Councillor. The other measures that are in, for example, the acoustic fence and then the levels, the other rooms all currently comply with the condition. So the new vents are purely on the rooms that do not comply with the condition. So at the end of the day, they would all then be in compliance with the condition.
Thank you for that.
Again, councillors, any further questions? No? Agreed. And do we have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Coates, thank you very much indeed. Okay, that's carried. And the last item of business in front of us today is a notification, a proposal of application notice that's come forward regarding erection of industrial units, classes 4, 5 and 6, and the formation of SUDS, landscaping and associated works at land south of Target House, Ruthvenfield Road, Inveralmond Industrial Estate in Perth. Okay, do you have any comments, committee, on the paper?
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
It's a question rather than a comment. I just wonder if there are any actual paths through this site. I have no problem with the outline proposal, but if there, I notice there's a dismantled railway. I would like that to be resurrected, convener, but I'm living in a dream world of 100 years ago, or maybe 200 years ago, and that's not going to happen. But often if there's a dismantled railway, there's an informal or formal path through it. That's my first question. And my second question is, will there be any access to some of these wonderful new roads that we're busy building from this site onto the bypass or thereby, or would you still have to go along, is it Inveralmond Road? Somebody else will keep me right on that. Or through Ruthven Farm, because it's going to generate more traffic. And I think because it's almost right beside the new road, it'll be a pity if you've got to go around in a huge circle to get to 10 yards away. And I don't know that. So that's just two things.
The joys of steam aside and the roads at Inveralmond, I don't believe we have any details for the application yet. It's just the notification that one will be coming in, but I'll ask that question.
Yes, as the convener has said, this is clearly a proposed application which may be coming forward, and all the details would then come in as part of that. I mean, what we do have, as you'll see, that those are the sort of things that we would certainly be looking at, you know, the transport implications, and I've just scribbled down on my note as well any links and paths with regard to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly, Councillor Barnacle.
Just follow on that point. Paragraph 19 lists policy CF2, public access. And also, I'm just mindful that I think we have a policy that protects former railway lines from development if they are potential footpaths, cycleways. I think we have a policy to that effect. I don't know whether it's CF2, but I'm pretty sure we have such a policy, which would
CF2,
look at that. Okay? Yeah.
Do we have any further questions or comments regarding this notification? No. Can we ask if that can be noted? Agreed. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. And that concludes today's business. Thank you very much.